Hello, everyone. My name's Anthony Martin, and I'm the course leader for concept art for games and film here at Staffordshire University. Uh, I thought what we would do today is sort of do two things. I will give you a short kind of presentation about what it's like to be a concept artist on our course and what the study is kind of like and the sort of things that you should bear in mind when you come to study with us. It also helps to introduce myself and show some of my work, but also to show some of the other teaching staff's work as well. And you'll see that we have a wide variety of kind of styles and kind of favorite kind of genres and things like that. Um, After the presentation, I will do a short demo of some digital kind of painting on Photoshop. Fairly sort of laid back kind of stuff. I'm going to show you one sort of key thing that I think that a lot of students, a lot of beginners struggle to try and get past when they first start doing digital painting in Photoshop or Clip Studio or Krita or whatever your digital painting software of choice is. I'm going to show you something there that's kind of like a fundamental way of approaching kind of digital painting, and then I'm just going to do some imaginative little digital sketches of just some little sort of environments, little sort of vaguely moody fantasy kind of landscapes, just done in black and white and grayscale. They're what we would call thumbnails, and they're the stage, a very, very important stage in concept art before you start doing the actual finished kind of designs. In fact, most of our time as a concept artist is spent more at what we would call the thumbnail ideation stage than it is painting beautiful finished kind of illustrations. So with that in mind, let's have a look at what it's like to be an artist at Staffordshire University. So by choosing to study concept art at university, you're basically making your first real proper step into turning something that was a hobby into a career. And when we're talking about art, that has some profound effects on your relationship to art, because prior to studying this, you will have done art as a hobby, as a pastime, and you kind of draw for yourself. You decide when your drawing's finished, when your design is kind of finished, and you decide whether it's good enough or whether you want to change it or not. The big thing that is different about doing this at university and then getting a job as a concept artist is that you're kind of no longer the person who decides whether your designs are finished or not. And I think this is a very important thing to bear in mind when you start to study concept art and you want to be a concept artist, because it can have quite an impact on your relationship to kind of art, and not always in a positive kind of way. But I think if you know that that is going to be something that you will have to think about, then it can be a little bit kind of smoother for you, this kind of transition. Anyway, I'm Anthony Martin then. So here's some examples of some of just a few bits of my kind of work. I am mostly an environment artist. I'm the course leader for the entire course as well, but I mostly lead and teach on the environment modules on our course. On a personal level, I am a big sci-fi kind of nerd, but I'm also a big film kind of nerd. So I try and make most of my work look like it could maybe be a still from a film that hasn't kind of been made kind of yet. As I said, I like science fiction, but then again, I also like old-fashioned kind of horror kind of stuff as well, and I like fantasy as well, and I like spy stuff. I just like all things that's kind of very filmic, very kind of cinematic-y. I've got some other examples of some work from our other members of the teaching team. Not all of them, because I could quite easily spend the entire webinar just showing you my colleagues' kind of work. So I'll show you kind of selection. We also have a guy called Tom Rush, and Tom teaches mostly in the second year of the university, and he is more of a character kind of creature guy, and he often sort of says that if it's got teeth and tentacles and claws, then that's what he's kind of into. And he actually comes from a special effects makeup background for film and television, where he would design and then actually make these monsters for real, or apply the makeup to the actors for real. So very kind of like live action kind of stuff. But he also does what I would call more straightforward kind of concept art. And he basically teaches a lot of our second years how to sculpt digitally, but then also how to design creatures. And then in the final year, he also takes some advanced classes on character design and sculpture as well. We also have Emily, who is very similar. She comes from a similar kind of background. And in fact, she does most of her initial sculpting for real, physically, using clay over what we would call armatures. And again, she's very much into monsters and creatures and that kind of thing. We also have a guy called Joe Grunow. He teaches, he's not like a character specialist or an environment specialist. He is more of a digital kind of painting specialist, or a fundamental painting kind of specialist. He's the guy who, in the first year, puts the students through their paces in terms of learning how to draw correctly in perspective, and then also how to paint in a more refined kind of way. Basically, in some ways, trying to get a lot of students unlearning some of the bad habits that they might have picked up as they were self-teaching themselves so far. We also have Molly. Molly is an old student, actually, of mine. In fact, I was Molly's final year project supervisor when she was a student. Gosh, I think about four years ago. Now, Molly is also a character kind of specialist, but she also specializes in costume design. So another big thing in concept art is that we don't just design characters and environments and vehicles and spaceships and all things like that, but we also have to design things like costumes. And Molly comes at it from an interesting angle, in the fact that she will not only design the costumes, but then she can physically make the costumes as well. Final year project was designing and then making quite an elaborate fantasy kind of witch kind of costume. We also have Jared. Jared helps Tom out a lot on his creature modules. Jared is very much into designing many different creatures all the time. He's often designing stuff and sort of putting it on his Instagram every week. He does a lot of stuff. This is a lot of his personal work because he is an avid Dungeons and Dragons player. I imagine maybe some of you might be D&D players. We certainly have a lot of D&D players on our course, and Jared likes to illustrate his characters that take part in his campaigns. And as I said, he helps out Tom Rush a lot on his characters and creature modules. I'm helped out a lot by a guy called Jamie Moore, who is a part-time lecturer here. His main job is a concept artist and illustrator. A little bit like me, he is more of an environment kind of concept artist, although he can do characters as well. And he's actively working on a series of video games at the moment as their concept artist. And he helps out me a lot, part-time, on my environment modules. We also have a guy called Ian Naylor. So one big part of concept art here at Staffordshire University is that we don't just get you to do stuff digitally. In your first year and your second year, you'll get a lot of life drawing teaching. In fact, you'll get 6 hours a week for one whole teaching term in your first year, and then the same again in your second year. And Ian is our life drawing module leader. So he specializes in traditional drawing and sketching. He's also an avid aviation sort of fan, and he used to be the artist in residence at a local aviation museum, relatively local to Stoke anyway. We also have Kirsty. Kirsty is another character person, and Kirsty specializes in traditional watercolor and folklore illustration as well, and brings a very much of an illustrator's perspective to being a concept artist, and helping to distinguish between the difference between illustration and concept art. And there is a fairly profound difference between those two. Then finally, we have Moylin, who is a relatively new member of our teaching team. And Moylin heads up our character concept design modules in the first year, for first year students. Moylin comes from a very stylized cartoon background. She designs characters for animations and cartoons and things like that. And she's just about to start her character concept module, which will start next week, which will be exciting as well. So hopefully you can see that we have a wide variety of styles and specialisms here. And I would hope that kind of no matter what your interests are as a concept artist, where your preferences might lie, there will be a member of staff who will be into that and be interested in that, and you'll be able to talk to them about it, and they will be able to give you specialist kind of help. So we place a big emphasis here at Staffs on building up your fundamental art skills and kind of making you, in some ways, as I mentioned, unlearning the stuff that you might have picked up just by teaching yourself over the years, but that is maybe not so useful when it comes to being a professional concept artist. We spend a lot of time trying to teach you the proper way, so to speak, or there's no true one proper way, so to speak. And I would often be a bit cautious of people saying there's only one way. But we will teach you fairly tried and tested industry standard ways of doing things. But we believe that you need to know the fundamentals of drawing and painting if you are to become successful concept artists, because you will probably have amazing ideas. But if you don't have those technical skills to realize those ideas, actually practically, then you're a concept idea person rather than a concept artist kind of person. So we teach you a lot of fundamental stuff, especially in the first year. And in fact, the first 4 or 5 months of your time in the first year here at Staffs, you'll be doing nothing but fundamentals. You'll be learning to do your perspective drawing, your life drawing, your painting. You'll be learning how to do some basic 3D modeling, because I would class that as fundamental skills as well. We'll get you to do all of that stuff before we let you loose on actually designing characters and environments. But apart from this fundamental idea that you need to know these kind of fundamental artistic skills, you also do have to be technically proficient in the software that we use. Back in the olden days, concept art used to be done using acrylic paints and gouache and watercolors and Copic marker pens. And you can still do maybe the preliminary parts of the job using that kind of thing, certainly with marker pens and pencils. But there's no getting around the fact that contemporary concept art is a digital format. And so you'll need to be fluent in things like Photoshop and 3D software like Blender and sculpting software like ZBrush or ZBrush. And we will teach you all of that kind of stuff as well. It takes a lot of practice. It's very much like learning to play a musical instrument. And it's like learning to play a musical instrument to sort of like a concert level, rather than just being able to maybe strum a few chords of your favorite kind of song. So it takes a lot of practice. We typically would say that a student should spend double the amount of hours outside of lecture time practicing the skills that we're teaching you. So that would typically be about 12 hours per module, because you'll get 6 hours a week of actual teaching. So it takes a lot of time to get good. If you don't practice, then it's going to take exponentially longer to get good, if that's even possible, to be honest. I think this is one of those skills that requires a certain real amount of focus and self-motivation as well. And we'll always be there to help out, and we're very much available. We always obviously want you to do the best that you possibly can, but there's no getting around the fact that it does take a lot of work. But I want to show you that it pays off. This is a bit of work from a student, actually a student who now teaches here. This is a bit of work from when he was in his first year, and it took him an entire semester to do this. He had more than one module, so he was working on more than one thing, but it took him an entire semester to do. And for a first year's bit of work, it is, I would say, very much okay, but not particularly brilliant. When we do these talks in person on campus, he's often here, and he often flinches and cringes when he looks back at his old sort of student work. But he practiced a lot. So as soon as he started in the first year of our course, he was always practicing. He would always do homework that we set, and then he would do even more kind of homework. And it wasn't long before he started getting really quite good. And now he is a professional concept artist and illustrator, and is producing work that you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen. This is a bit of environment work for a role-playing game based on the internet kind of copy-pasta sort of idea of secure, contain, protect, SCP. They're making tabletop role-playing games of that, and I think they're making video games of it as well. And Jamie is working on it as one of their lead concept artists. Now he produces that work, and it doesn't take him a whole semester, which is about 3 months. It now takes him 5 days to complete the whole thing. And to be honest, it really takes 3 days because he has to get it up to a standard that looks pretty much finished so that he can show his clients, and then his clients will then give him notes on what they want changed. And this, again, brings me back to this idea that as a concept artist, and even as an illustrator, to be honest, as well, you're no longer really the author, so to speak, of your work. You are like a hired person who's going to carry out some work on another person's behalf on their idea. And there's often times when you disagree with what your client might say or your art director might want, but you still have to do what they want, because ultimately you're producing artwork for them. But then Jamie, yeah, as I said, so Jamie does this stuff now in about kind of 5 days, and he might be working on multiple concepts and illustrations at kind of once, but he could only do it because he did a lot of practice. This can sometimes really be hard on us when we're starting out, because I bet you guys are known amongst your family and friends as like the artist in the family or in the friendship group, and they do really good artwork. They're so good. Then you come to university to study a course like this, and you'll suddenly find yourself in a room with 40 other people who are all the best artist in their family and friendship group. And even though you shouldn't necessarily compare yourself to students, especially in the first year, you can't help it. It's just human nature. And you can sometimes feel that you're not as good as the person sat kind of next to you, and that it's hard learning to draw buildings in perspective when you're not used to doing it, and you're more used to drawing, I don't know, your favorite kind of fan art of your favorite kind of anime character or something kind of like that. So it can be really difficult. But you should know that that is the first stage of beginning to get really good at something, that we all suck a little bit when we start off. It's getting over that kind of part. That's in some ways requires more mental energy, I think, than the actual technical process of learning to draw and paint and 3D model. What often happens is we have this sort of kind of curve here, sometimes called the Dunning-Kruger curve, is that we start out when we're super little and we've never drawn before as clueless, and then we find out that actually we got a little bit of a knack for this, and we can draw quite well, as we get this naive sense of confidence. And then you decide to do this at university, and you take a little bit of a hit, and you suddenly are aware of all the things that you don't actually know. And then you realize how much there is to learn. And in my mind, this curve isn't very accurate, because it doesn't really level off, and you don't really ever really become the master. In my mind, and I've been doing this now for almost 30 years, is that the curve just keeps on going. straight up. It never stops. And the key to dealing with that is to be excited by it and to just be constantly fascinated about all the cool new stuff that you can do and how you can just constantly kind of grow as an artist. This can cause a certain amount of stress, right? As I've kind of hinted at. If you didn't cause any stress at all, I'd be worried. As you know, I would think, oh, you're really taking it kind of seriously. But it can cause sometimes too much kind of stress. At Staffs, what we do is we assign every single student with what's called an academic mentor. And this is a member of the teaching staff, not necessarily concept, but it's definitely someone in the games department. We have a large games department. Basically someone who knows about games related courses, and you get assigned to them when you start, and you're kind of they're your academic mentor for your entire time here, and they're the kind of person who you can ask, what does it mean if I get this percentage in the course? What does this feedback mean? Can you help me understand this feedback maybe? Or let's say that the worst comes to the worst and you don't do so well on one module, and you have to retake it in some kind of way. The academic mentor can kind of talk you through what that means and the repercussions of that and strategies to get back on track. They're kind of like your academic buddy in a way. They're going to be there to kind of sort of motivate you and kind of guide you kind of on. They're not like a personal tutor. They're not going to give you hours and hours of individual personal tutor lessons, but they are someone there who can basically guide you through the university kind of life. If things get really, really bad, Staffordshire University does have a student well-being department. So if your mental health takes really quite a bad kind of hit, the academic mentor can help point you towards them, and they can organise some more specialist kind of help. Ideally, we all want to be just here. We want to be in this kind of optimum creativity kind of level, this kind of level of stress. This actually has a sort of a name, especially when we're artistically minded. When things are here, you can sometimes enter what's called a flow state. And this is a sort of artistic state where you're tackling difficult problems, but the answers are coming to you fairly smoothly. You're managing to solve those problems as they come up to you. And it's a beautiful state of mind to be in. You don't always have that state, but when you're working on a project and you're overcoming each one of these little technical challenges, it's a great feeling. It's one of the best feelings in the world, I think, artistically, to be in that kind of state. So, concept art. What is concept art? Concept art is distinctly different from illustration. In illustration, the picture that you produce is the end result. It is the thing that the public will probably see. It's normally a very polished piece of artwork, no matter how it's kind of been done. Concept art is quite different. Concept art is not the finished product. Concept art is just one part of the process of, if it's a game, getting a character into a game, or getting a vehicle or an environment into a game that then a player interacts with. If it's a film, it might be a set that ends up being built, or a prop that gets manufactured, or a visual effect that then gets made by the visual effects kind of artist. Concept art is just one part of it, of that whole process. Most concept art never gets seen by anyone outside of the studio that you're working with, sometimes not even outside of the department in that studio. So we have to sort of become comfortable with the fact that our artwork will not get seen by many people, and that creating a big pretty picture is not the end goal of concept art. If it's more important to you to create a beautiful picture that is meaningful very much to yourself, then illustration is maybe a course that you're more suitable for. Or we also have a course at Staffordshire University called Cartoon and Comic Arts. We also have an animation kind of course as well. But concept art is just one tiny part of it. I like to call it maybe visual problem solving, in that a writer, producer, director will have a written idea of what something should be, And then it's your job as a concept artist to kind of turn those words and try and work out how do they actually work visually? How do they work in 3 dimensions? The level designer might have what's called a white box or a grey box version of a level. And this is just simply literally a white or grey blocky version of a level with absolutely no details. It's simply the physical floors and walls of where things are. And then the concept artist then will work with the level designer and draw over the top of that to decide what might it actually look like. If you're doing characters, most of your time doing characters, as I mentioned right near the beginning, is you'll be doing these things called thumbnails. You'll be doing these small kind of little drawings. You'll be doing lots and lots and lots of silhouettes, lots and lots of just line drawings with no kind of shading, so that you can take them to your art director or your senior concept artist, and they can go yes or no, or a bit. Can you maybe take this one just here, the second one, and give me another like dozen versions based off that kind of second one, another dozen of what we would call iterations. So again, you have to be rather precious by the fact with the fact that a lot of your work will not get seen, and a lot of it might not even get used, and you might not even see through one whole bit of artwork. It's very common for concept artists to start on one design and then be taken off, and then their design given to another concept artist who will then finish off the design while you start working on something new. Likewise, you might pick up a bit of work from another concept artist and you will have to then finish it off. It's very much a team effort, this kind of job. It's not really maybe the romantic notion of the artist in their studio painting alone and producing a final masterpiece. We are part of the pipeline. We also have to be interested in researching stuff. So you don't have to be like an expert at history or science or engineering or architecture or culture or politics or anything like that, but you have to be interested in it and you have to be willing to do the research. On our course, there are no big long essays or dissertations or anything kind of like that. It's nearly all practical kind of based, but we do require you to research your designs. So if we set you a task where you have to design a character who is going to be in a TV show that's set in feudal Japan, you should have to research what did people wear during those times? What did it look like? What did the different there's going to be different class systems in these times. So you have to make sure that you've researched it so your character is wearing the right type of clothes. So they're not wearing maybe like the clothes that the emperor would wear when they're actually someone in the middle classes, like a merchant or something like that. So you have to be a little bit of you have to be a nerd as well and be interested in finding stuff out. I think it's fascinating. I think concept artists are the kind of people who love looking at Wikipedia, I think, and going down a rabbit hole of Wikipedia to try and find out all they can about a certain type of thing. Here's an example of a typical bit of student work that a student did the other year when they were tasked with designing a sort of science fiction cloning laboratory for a collaborative group project. And in this case, this student called Patrick, he starts off with, again, these thumbnails. So they're very, very simple. They're very small. They're a little bit of line work and they're a little bit of grayscale kind of work. It's kind of what I'm going to be doing in a moment to show you. Each one of these probably takes no more than 15 minutes to kind of do. And that's the whole point. They should be quick. The idea should be put down, so to speak, on digital paper so that everyone else in the team and the senior can look at it and offer advice and opinions and critique on where the design is going. It's really important that we do this because big overall decisions can be made and changed with very little time being wasted if it only takes you 15 minutes to draw one of these. Whereas if you just went, okay, I will design a cloning laboratory, and you just went ahead and did it, and it will take you hours and hours and hours and hours. And if you're a student, it could take you weeks and weeks and weeks, only to be told that it's wrong. Then you've got to go back and do it again from scratch. And so that is not a very efficient way of doing it. So we start off with these thumbnails instead. When I get to a point where people are happy, then we can take it into something like 3D software. And in this case, 3D software is very, very useful for doing a kind of science fiction-y looking high-tech laboratory. Perspective is very unforgiving when you're drawing perfect cylindrical shapes, perfect boxes and things like that. And even though we teach you how to do that, and it's important that you know how to do that, when we get to a point where we're trying to simulate a more of a commercial working environment, 3D is very useful because now we can see how things work in an actual 3D space, and we can position our point of view around, and we can see where things maybe are too small or too big, too close or too far away from each other. Also, we can set up lights, and we can do a quick 3D render. We don't have to render it to the point where a visual effects artist might do it or a games artist might do it, because we're concept artists. We're not going to be really producing animations or any interactive things. We're just using the 3D because it will get us a good 3D look very quick. Then we'll take it into Photoshop or Clip Studio or Procreate or whatever, and then we'll paint over the top of that to do stuff that would take too long to do in 3D. And then we might take it back into 3D to do some more stuff. We might then go back all the way back to the beginning and work out some thumbnails for some details of potential, I don't know, computer consoles or things like that. The point is, we're using whatever is the most efficient tool at any one moment to do the task required. We're not trying to just show off, for example, that we can just paint the whole thing from scratch with no prep work at all. This is what being a concept artist is actually like. It's a very typical kind of way of working, and that's how we will teach you. This is the kind of stuff that you will learn, and we'll be expecting you to kind of do. We will be telling you what to design, and us as lecturers, not only will we be teaching you, we'll also be sort of a bit like a simulated kind of client or art director, and we will give you an idea of what it's like to get feedback and critique. Okay, let's say that you decide that you're definitely going to come to Staffordshire University. There's tons of stuff that you can do between now and September when we start. One of the key things I would say for you to do is to go to a website, go to ArtStation. Some of you probably already know ArtStation. You might look at it quite a lot. It's mostly known for showcasing a constantly refreshed gallery page. And it can be fun to look at that stuff for sure. But there is a part of it that not many students realize, not many applicants to our course realize is there, and it is arguably the most useful part of the website. It's called ArtStation Learning, and it's for free. You just have to create an account with ArtStation, and then you can visit and you can go and look at their learning tab, which is this bit just up here when you go to the ArtStation homepage. ArtStation Learning has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mini courses covering virtually all aspects of digital art by some of the biggest names in the industry. So these are the big people. These are the famous concept artists teaching you how to do certain specific little things. Each one of these mini courses only lasts an hour, and then they're broken down into chapters. There are nice little bite-sized kind of chunks. It's a very competitive industry to get into, so you kind of want to give yourself as much of an advantage as you can. And one of the greatest advantages that you can give yourself is to get on to a free resource like this and start learning some stuff before you even come to university. I would encourage you to think about what maybe you're not so good at, or maybe what are areas of doing art that are outside your comfort zone. And I would say look up one of the courses on ArtStation and have a go at one of those. So maybe you're a character person. Well, maybe then have a look at an environment mini course and have a go at that. I think it's extremely useful. Other things you can do, you can get on Discords with people that cover all manner of different famous artists might have their own Discords. There might be different subject area kind of Discords. One of the things that's really cool to do is do a games jam. This is where you make a whole game, typically in a weekend. And you just get together with a bunch of people and you just think, well, let's try and make a game in a weekend. It's never going to be, obviously, as glossy and as polished as some kind of big AAA kind of thing. But a lot of breakout successes in the industry have started out as games jams and then have become full-blown indie hits. So it can be a really cool thing to do, and it's a very, very useful thing to do because it will also teach you what it's like to work as part of a team, and to realize that you're producing art for the other team members rather than for just yourself. You can go on other bits of social media as well. Many members of the staff are on LinkedIn. Quite a lot of our students are as well, and that can be good because it can help broaden the connections you have to industry, because a lot of us come from industry and are still in touch with our industry friends and ex-colleagues. And so you can see who we talk to on LinkedIn. Twitter can be quite useful because concept artists on Twitter will often talk about their job, and they'll talk about what it's like to work in the industry. And the industry, the games industry, the film industry, the TV industry, they're big, complicated industries that have their own unique issues. And I think it's important to know or have an idea about what those issues are before you even graduate, so that you will go into that industry with your eyes open and you'll know what's going on, what are the things to look out for, that kind of thing. And I think Twitter's often very good for that kind of stuff, because you will get the artist's opinion unfiltered, so to speak. They will not necessarily be towing some kind of company kind of line. I would also go to conferences as well if you can. Many conferences occur in person, but many of them also now will occur online, and these can be really, really good to attend. Some of them are free, some of them are not free, but they can be really, really useful to go to, and they're very, very fun. We often will also take our students to conferences. There's a big one that happens in London called Vertex, and we're going to be taking, well, basically as many of the students who want to come, we're going to be taking them down to London to that conference in April. But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff just there. So having said all of that, let's actually do some little sort of practical demonstrations. So we will go to Photoshop just here. Just a reminder, if you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat, or put your hand up so that Mitchell can sort of field some questions, and we'll just do some stuff just here, just to sort of show you. So this is Photoshop, which is a very typical program. It's the one that we teach at university. We don't force you to use Photoshop. We also have other digital painting programs on our machines here at Staffs. We have Krita, which is a free painting program as well. But students will often come in and they'll use their iPads and they'll use Procreate, or they'll use Clip Studio, because a lot of students love Clip Studio as well. We can't teach every single one in depth, otherwise we could spend an entire year just covering different software's kind of interfaces. So we focus on Photoshop because it is the industry standard. It's not necessarily the best, but it is the industry standard. So it works on a layer system. And I want to show you one thing that I think a lot of students, when they come here, don't know, or they tackle in a way that is not the best kind of way. Let's say you had to draw, or you had to paint a three-dimensional looking sphere. And you couldn't use any 3D, you couldn't use any photos or anything like that. You've just got to paint a three-dimensional sphere, and it's got to look proper solid. It's got to look like it's got a certain amount of shininess to it. It's got to have a shadow as well. How would you do it? Now, a lot of students, when they come, will try and draw the sphere with a brush like this. And instead of getting a perfect sphere, they get what looks like a potato, or a slightly wonky looking kind of orange. They might draw a sphere like that, and they might go, that's not quite right. Okay, well, I'll try and get that looking a bit more sort of circular like this. And I might go to my eraser tool and I'll erase it like this. And they get to a certain point and I'll go, okay, it's not a perfect sphere, but it'll do. Okay, so the next thing I'll try and do then to draw this sphere is I might use another layer. I might go back to my brush, and I've got to color it in now. So let's say that I'm going to just do it in grays. Okay, I'll get a gray color. There quite a bright grey colour, and I'll colour it in. So I'll go like this. Oh, no, wrong kind of grey, maybe a bit darker. And I'll start doing this. I'll do this like this. Now, the mistake here is that you're treating digital painting and drawing as if you were painting for real as a kid, maybe with felt tip pens. So you're using the brush tip size is the size that you've chosen, and it's never changing, and you're scribbling in the kind of color or the value like this, and then you want to make it look shiny, so you might go a bit brighter. You might look like that's where the highlight's going to be, and then you go, yeah, obviously though it's not smooth enough, so I've got to have a transition, so I'll go a bit darker around here. Oops, I'm going over the edges. Or now I'll go, oh, now I've gone too dark. This is something that we see all the time. It's very, very difficult to get a student out of this mindset about how to sort of paint efficiently in a digital kind of way. We're painting using a computer. We have things like undo, which you don't really have in reality, and there's an argument to be made that actually an undo can make things even harder, because they basically allow you to get infinitely stuck in a loop of indecision. But there are lots of other things in these softwares, and it doesn't matter if it's Photoshop or Procreate or whatever, that there's lots and lots of tools here, and we might as well use them. So we can paint a extremely realistic looking 3D sphere. We can paint it in 2 brush marks, and I'll show you how. This is almost like the party trick of digital painters. So instead, I'll create a new layer, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a more suitable brush. I have a bunch of my own brushes. One thing also students often get is they become brush collectors. They collect hundreds, sometimes thousands of brushes, and then they become paralyzed with indecision about which brush to use. I've got my own personal little selection of brushes that I hand out to students, and I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 brushes. And even that, in my mind, is probably too much. But I'm going to go right to the absolute most basic possible brush you can get, which is this brush here called the hard round brush in Photoshop. And all that brush is just a big hard round circle. But you can see I can change the brush tip size. And this is something that I think that students and beginners don't do enough. They don't realize that in reality you should start with the biggest brush possible and only get down to a small brush kind of right near the end of the process. You can do a lot of stuff with just one brush. So I said I could do a completely realistic, well, I say completely realistic, a fairly realistic 3D sphere with 2 brush marks. So the first brush mark I'm going to make it like the darkest part of my sphere, and I'm just going to tap once like that. That's one brush mark. Now I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to clip this layer to the old layer. What this means is I can only, when I paint in this new layer, will only go onto the canvas where there's something beneath it, which is that first brush mark I made. So I'm going to change brushes now from this extremely simple brush to this extremely simple brush, which is basically the hard round, except instead of being hard, it's soft. It's just as big. In fact, I'm going to make it even bigger, and I'm going to choose a brighter kind of value, and my second brush mark, there we go. We've now got a fairly realistic looking 3D ball. If I wanted to make the lighting happen a bit more from that angle just there, I can make it feel like the light is coming from that angle, and it looks smooth, and it looks clean, and it looks much better, and it's much quicker to do than if you try and just draw it in this extremely kind of childlike way, as if you're using a felt tip pen. And we can take this sort of one step further by giving the ball a shadow. And again, we can use the things that that are there in our digital painting packages to make life easier. So in this case, I might as well just take that initial mark I made and uncopy it. So if in Photoshop, I can copy a layer by holding down Alt and then just dragging the layer away from itself. And this will give me a copy of that layer. And now I'm going to make a shadow for this ball by using this, by just what we call free transforming this. So if I do Control and T, I can now shrink this down, put it like this, and I can use Shift maybe to elongate this. And this can now become the shadow of our ball, like this. And because it's on a separate layer, in Photoshop, we can change the opacity, how see-through, how transparent versus how opaque a layer is. So I can always say, well, I don't like that shadow, it's too dark. So I make that shadow a bit lighter by simply reducing the opacity of that shadow layer. So maybe something like that. And now I can add something like what we would call a contact shadow. And this is a shadow, this is a soft little shadow that just sort of is very, very subtle, and it sits there just where the tip of things touch other things. In computer graphics, this is sometimes called an ambient occlusion kind of shadow. And I can do the same thing again. I can maybe just copy the shadow layer that I've already got. So now I've got two, and I will shrink this down again. Now I can zoom in a bit here. I can use my navigator to zoom in to get this placed exactly where I want it to be. So I can shrink it in like this. Now contact shadow is very soft, but that's very hard at the moment. So I need to soften it. I'm going to make it also full opacity, so it's going to be black. And I'm just going to blur it using a filter. Blur, Gaussian filter. And then as I increase this, this becomes softer and softer, like that. And so this now becomes like our little contact shadow. And I can maybe shrink this down even further. So it's like this little shadow that sits just where the ball touches the ground. And now it begins to feel even more kind of realistic, almost like it's like a very simple 3D render. But it's learning these kind of techniques is the important kind of thing to get to grips with when you're learning kind of concept art, and breaking away from all those kind of bad habits that you might have picked up as you were kind of doing it as a hobby for fun. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide these. In fact, I'll delete these. And I'll just do a little bit of a sort of imaginative landscapey kind of painting, just imagining simple kind of landscapes. I might not talk all the way through this part. So again, if you want to ask a question, now would be a great time to ask, because we've got about 10, 12 kind of minutes left of this session. Let's see how much I can get done while I kind of do this. So this is almost a little bit like, if you ever watched Bob Ross on YouTube, it's a bit like that. We work from the back to the forward. So we work with the sky kind of first. So I'm going to probably start with this soft brush, and I might start with a brighter kind of value against this kind of grey that I've got, and I might switch on as well this pressure sensitivity and just sort of imagine kind of like a brighter point in the horizon just here, and I might go a bit darker along the top. I'm using a huge big brush here. It's one of the big things. You don't want to start off with small brushes. You want to start off with the smallest brushes that you can comfortably get away with. Maybe just like this. We've got this general feeling of light, maybe coming over from this kind of side, and I might start creating a new layer. And then I'll think maybe of distant, far kind of background kind of mountains. And what I like to sometimes do, what I like to use to do this is, I don't actually like to use a brush at all. I like to use this lasso selection, because it means I get very, very crisp, sharp kind of edges. And it's very difficult to try and draw intricate detail with this. So it almost forces you to be a bit more loose and sort of gestural. And just imagine this was like distant kind of mountains. Again, if you ever watch Bob Ross, this is very similar to when he uses the knife, the palette knife, to kind of get this. kind of when he does these kind of mountains. So I'll do this on a separate layer, and again, I'll go to maybe a darker value, because generally what happens is things tend to be brightest at the furthest back, and they gradually tend to get a bit brighter as they come forwards, unless certain lighting kind of effects are happening. So I might just put this in like this. I can also hide this selection so that I only see the kind of shape of it, and I can maybe go a bit brighter. So that my mountains are sort of, my distant mountains are a little bit brighter at the bottom, where you can imagine like the dust in the atmosphere sort of settling, and a little bit darker on the kind of top. Kind of maybe a bit like, sort of a bit like that, maybe. And then I could add another layer, and we can build up planes of this stuff. And the more planes that you have, the more depth that your painting kind of feels like it kind of has. So on a new layer, I might use the lasso selection again, deselect that, and maybe this time kind of have it come up kind of like that, and maybe have more sort of little spiky bits. And maybe even make it completely go off of the actual kind of page. Maybe a bit like that. And I get my brush, and again, I can sample the color that I've got here. No, I'm not even doing it in colors, am I? I'm doing just black and white. And I can maybe darken this. Again, I can hide this and do that. So it begins to feel like this background mountain's in the far distance, and this one's a bit closer to us. And there's no detail in there at all at the moment. It's just shapes. There's one thing to bear in mind: shapes are everything in concept design. You get a nice shape going on, and you'd be amazed at how simple you can keep the shading inside of that shape, and for it to work, and for it to be to read as a real kind of thing. So I don't want to get too caught up in trying to draw loads and loads of kind of details just here. So, and again, I might have it a little bit lighter at the kind of base just here. I kind of got my light coming from this sort of direction, so I might want to have some kind of indication of kind of light hitting maybe the sides of the mountains just here. So to do that, I could create a new layer and clip it to this layer, and I could begin to maybe just draw in just sort of like the planes of the sides of maybe where I can imagine these rocky features to be. Like this. And a lot of this, getting this to look good, a lot of this just comes with practice. And what I can do here, I'll hide that so we don't see it, and then I'd fill this in with a slightly lighter value. It's on its own separate layer, so if I get the value wrong, I can always change my mind. But already, look, already begins to feel with the tiniest little bit of shape here. Now begins to feel like the light is kind of hitting the sides here of these kind of rocky kind of features. Now I might actually switch to an actual brush to create maybe yet another layer in the foreground. Let's have a look at my brushes. Well, I want a brush that is maybe fairly opaque, actually. Maybe something kind of like this, and this is quite fairly opaque, so it'll paint. There'll be no transparency in it like this at all, especially if I turn that off. And I'm going to select this, and I'll go a bit darker, sort of still. I might just swoop in something, kind of like that. Maybe this is the brow, the crest of a hill, and maybe also we've got like got a tree, something like a tree trunk coming up, kind of like this.